Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you are a grizzled veteran trying to buy back your publishing that you sold for $2,000 in 1972, or else a scrappy upstart trying to sell your publishing for $2,000 right now, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of December 2020, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Dieter who drove a 2008 Dodge Magnum with a decal of Calvin and Hobbes peeing on the phrase New World Order, and who was always trying to sell you THC oil in baby food containers. And old Dieter would charge you about $1,000 for a website that was obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. It powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. Everything that you need is already built in: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, the ability to sell your music and merch commission-free. It's really a wonderful product. The Working Songwriter Podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days and use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming months, every single Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I go live for Sunday Songs. It is a live stream. I'm live, playing music live, taking requests live, answering questions in the live chat. We're building a nice little community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this show. So come on over and be a part of it every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, on my YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, search for Joe Pug, and then subscribe to my channel, and you'll be able to find the show. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. You could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to because you dig the show and you're not going to miss a few bucks every month. If just 1% of our listenership kicked in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make a profound difference. So thanks for everybody who's already decided to do that. If you're not in a spot where you can do that, I totally get it. There's a few ways that you could help us out for free. You could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or you could tell a friend about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. I will end all the harassment there. This will be our last show of the year. There will not be an episode next week because Friday is Christmas Day. I know it's been a strange, tough year in so many ways, but one of the real bright spots for me has been this podcast, a renewed focus on this podcast. Taking the show weekly instead of monthly has certainly been a lot of work, but it's also been really rewarding. And that's all due to you. All the messages that I get from you guys out there listening, whether it's a poem recommendation or an artist recommendation or just some kind words, they really mean a lot. And they have been a really nice point of human contact for me over these strange, disconnected COVID days. So thank you, listener at home, for being a part of this Working Songwriter community. I love being able to make this show for you. It brings a lot of meaning into my life. So here's to a 2021 that's much better than 2020. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next year. Our guest this week is a native of Greenville, South Carolina, who has a rich family history in music. Marcus King watched both his father and grandfather carve a path in the music business before he himself dropped out of high school to pursue his own star. It proved to be a prescient decision as he has rose to national prominence at lightning speed over the last few years, culminating in a Grammy nomination this year for Best Americana Album. He's built a reputation as a prolific touring act, playing as many as 140 shows last year before COVID brought the industry to a standstill. He has shared the stage with Jason Isbell, Josh Ritter, Chris Stapleton, and many others. He's a recording artist for Fantasy Records, alongside label mates James Taylor and the Tedeschi Trucks Band. The Washington Post has called him a guitar phenom, and Chris Stapleton has described Marcus as one of his favorite artists. The New York Times has said that he channels the musical spirit of generations past, including the Allman Brothers, Otis Redding, and James Brown. Marcus and I were able to catch up on the phone this week, and he told me about his journey so far. Marcus King, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. It sounds like growing up, you didn't exactly have a typical childhood. You had a childhood just steeped in music, your family and otherwise. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about how you grew up and how music was a part of your life as a kid?
Well, yeah, absolutely, man. I was really blessed to grow up around a family of musicians and folks that appreciated music if they weren't musically inclined. My grandmother, who we just lost, was a really big fan of Dean Martin and Perry Como, and I would listen to the crooner stuff with her. And my grandfather would later teach me about George Jones and Willie and Waylon and all the others, Charlie Pride. And that's the kind of music he played. And my father, was a blues nut, still is. So I had a lot of different music to learn about at a young age. It was wonderful.
And I understand that your dad played with gospel acts as well. How did the church impact the music that was around you and the music that you would end up playing?
I think the most impactful part of the church growing up in a Pentecostal environment was not as much the music. Of course, it had a huge impact on me and the way that I approached things. But what was more impactful to me was the preachers on Sunday sermon and being around people that could speak with such conviction and really, really mean every single thing that they say and really try to pull emotion out of you. That's what I carried with me into the live performances that I do, is that if you're going to say something, you should really, really believe 110% what you're saying.
And do you think not only the performance, did you take that into your writing in a way? Did any of that steep into the lyricism you bring to things?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it for sure. Once I started writing, I quit keeping a journal. I quit keeping anything like that, because that's all that writing was for me. It was just kind of an open book, and it's always made me more comfortable to just be able to say everything that's on my mind to whoever would listen.
You're obviously known for playing guitar and in a lot of your bio and backstory, I've read that you started playing guitar early. When did songwriting come into the equation, though? Did that happen immediately, or pardon me? When did songwriting come into the equation? Did that happen immediately, or was that something that came along later?
Songwriting for me came a little bit later. I had always played guitar since I can remember, but it wasn't until I was about 13 that I started writing. And, that was just a lot of trauma, just a lot of things that you go through as a kid. I lost my best friend in a car accident when I was 13, and that was kind of it for me. I just needed another source of creativity past the guitar. I needed another source of relief, and that's when I turned to the pen and the paper, and that's when I started singing too.
Was that an easy transition for you, or was it rocky at first?
Well, I mean, the voice is like a muscle, and the songwriting is a muscle. You have to build it, and it comes with time. It's something that I still work on, and guitar playing the same way. But I mean, it felt natural, but just like everything else, it was just as rocky as anything.
It's funny you mentioned that you kind of got into it from that good friend of yours that passed away. There is something about writing music for people who aren't here anymore. At least I've noticed in my own life. There is something about that in your own heart can kind of put a button on things, can kind of put a little bit of closure to it. Did you find that at all?
I do find that with my writing, and I write a lot of songs about people that we've lost that aren't with us anymore, and it's particularly harder when it's people that had so much more to give, and it is a good way to find some closure, past the funeral or past the wake. It is a sense of closure. That's a good way to put it.
It is tough when someone goes before their time. One of the guys that I toured with the most when I first got started, when I was about your age, was Justin Townes Earle, who just passed away. And, I just kind of had the same feeling when he passed away a couple months ago of just like, it's always a tragedy when someone leaves, but when they leave and you feel like there is still a lot left to give, I mean, damned if there isn't just a bitter taste in your mouth afterwards.
Entirely, man. I agree with you entirely. And, I've lost grandparents that were 90 years old or even further up there in years. And, they will explicitly say, I'm ready to go. And it hurts. It hurts really bad still, losing someone that you care about so much. But when you lose someone that's young and still has so much life left to live, it can almost make you angry. But in those losses, I feel like we create a lot more. We almost feel like we have to create twice as much,
I know what you mean, and I know that there's something about the reason I really like writing songs is it's not like writing a newspaper article or something like that where you're trying to get at some definitive account of something, because the feelings that you're talking about, losing a friend like that, like they're more ephemeral than that. They're more they're harder to understand, and in that way, songs can kind of touch on something infinite. You don't have to actually say the thing in a song, and it still gets across.
I agree with you. I think that's a really great way to put it, man. And that's why I've always kind of approached my writing. And I've got songs that have no, particular rhyme scheme. And at first I was kind of, bashful about that. But if that's the way that it needs to come out of you, I think just do that. As long as it's got as long as it's listenable,
Yeah. Well,
say what you need to say.
Have you ever had it happen to you that you write a song like that and you don't realize it until someone points out later that none of it rhymes? You're like, oh, damn, well, it sounded like it rhymed to me.
Yeah, no, it was actually a song of mine, Goodbye Carolina, that I wrote about a friend that I lost actually a couple of years ago. And it was pointed out to me like a year after releasing the song that the second verse really has no rhyme scheme at all. And I thought, that's interesting. I could have swore it did.
Yeah. Well, usually that means that it's funny, man. The older I get and the more that I write, I find myself doing a lot less editing. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I found myself, I would edit and I'd get a song to a point where it was technically perfect, like everything rhymed, but the song just sucked after that. You know what I mean? And so do you find yourself doing too much editing before, or do you kind of go best idea or first idea, best idea? What's your kind of way that you work?
My process has always kind of been, which I think a lot of folks are like this, but when I'm on the road or if I'm at home, I kind of just jot down little ideas here and there, or I'll put down a voice memo put down a melodic idea or a lyrical idea, and then I'll kind of lock myself away for like a week or two. I have a few spots that I like to go to write, and this is where I just kind of pull out all my notebooks and all my voice memos and start weaving this tapestry of all these ideas, and things start to make sense. I feel like an old detective like connecting the yarn on the thumbtacks on the wall, and it all kind of comes together and it makes sense. And I think it's because at my core, I kind of have an unhealthy habit of just repressing my emotions and not addressing them immediately. So I think that's kind of indicative in my writing style too.
There's nothing unhealthy about that. It's just called being a dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I've never heard it kind of described like that, like you're a detective, but I know what you mean. It's almost like you're trying to listen to what your unconscious has to tell you.
Yeah. And you need a special place to do that for sure.
What are those places that you find yourself going to?
Man, as long as I can be next to nature, as long as I can get out and walk with my bare feet in nature and feel the serenity of earth around me, it's a really grounding thing to do. So I've got, a spot out in California I like to go to write, up around Malibu. And, if I can get out in the woods here in Tennessee, that always does me right.
That's the way to be. So you must have been chomping at the bit when you were younger to get going, because you just dropped out of high school to start working on music. Can you describe the process of deciding to drop out? Because that's a dramatic decision, wouldn't you say?
I would say. I watched my sister drop out, and I knew that she had done it for the wrong reasons. I love my sister dearly, and she's a wonderful person, and but I know at that time she had done it for the wrong reasons, and I knew that if I was going to drop out of high school, it wouldn't be for the wrong reasons. While I was in high school, I was I was the only long hair there, and I was not fully welcomed there. I could have been more welcomed, but I didn't really have any school spirit. We'll put it that way. So
Fair enough.
I wasn't really the favorite of any teacher there. Actually, there was one teacher, Miss Young, who I'll call out, who was actually pretty kind to me, and she actually had a Justin Townes Earl poster on her wall.
Oh, there
and
you go.
She probably listens to this podcast. So hey, Miss Young, she was always really kind to me, unless I was sleeping. But I remember that was the only teacher I liked, but everybody else, couldn't really stand them. Didn't really get along with anybody. I knew what I wanted to do was to play music. So I spoke to my parents about it, had a really nice conversation about it, like, I think this is what I want to do, and they gave me their blessing on it. It wasn't like I was dropping out so I could just be, a punk and just be a dropout. That's not what my intentions were. So the decision, there was a lot of thought that went to it, but as far as my guidance counselor was concerned, she didn't know about my intentions of playing music professionally, and she told me I was going to end up in prison, which I thought was a little extreme. And I didn't, thank God. But what I did was leave school and got my GED immediately, and then I went on the road shortly thereafter and just stayed until I'd say about 8 months ago when this pandemic hit.
Yeah, I know you've been a busy man the last few years. So can you kind of explain to me, I think our listeners really love to hear, explain to me the nuts and bolts of what you do, the day after you get your GED to start putting this on the ground. You say you took the show on the road. How did you put a band together? How did you start putting tours together? How did you start building an audience? What did that look like to you?
Well, for me, man, I kind of started this all when I was about 13. Is when I kind of started the process. I was lucky enough to be in my father's band up until that point, and I played drums for him or bass for him, but mostly I played guitar with him in his full band. And so I got to see him, kind of run a business. Well, he did. He ran a business. He had, his merch booth, and he had gigs. He would book them, And I learned from him a lot in that way. And what I learned early on was, all right, now I'm starting to get about 14, 15 years old. I got my what do you call it? It's a driver's license, but it's a temporary license.
Learners, yeah.
You know, a learner's permit, yeah. So I could only drive during the daytime unless I had a licensed driver. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna hire older cats to play with. So I always have a licensed driver in the car. So I hired older cats, and a lot of these guys had like wives and families, you know, kids even. So they needed to work, and I was booking us like 4 and 5 nights a week. And this is all while I was in high school, and I would provide the PA. You know, we were working really, really steady, and I was just going as far as I could out of South Carolina to where I could still get back and make it to school on time the next day. You know, that was kind of my hustle, was just go out and play as many nights of the week that I could keep us booked. I had us 2 house gigs a week, one in North Carolina and one in Greenville, South Carolina. I just keep us busy, and once I started booking us out of state, I kind of created a false alias that I would use to email clubs. You know, Robert was his name, and I would use that name to kind of reach out and make us look a little more professional than we were. Yeah, but that's kind of how it started. And we had a buddy of ours actually that gave us a hand when I was about 18. He told us he would pay for us to cut a record of songs. So we went out to California and cut Soul Insight, and he loaned us his Suburban, and that was our means of transportation for at least a year.
Oh man, there's a great divide between bands starting out, the bands that go with the white panel van and the bands that tour in Suburbans. I feel like that's the main divide.
Well, I'll have to say we kind of split that divide, because we did the Suburban and we got the Ford E350 1 year later, after the Suburban broke down on us at least 4 times.
Well,
we got in the white van. That was our transportation for easy 4 years, man. It was wonderful.
Oh yeah, I've done my time in those. You know, it's so funny hearing you talk. It's like you were talking about having those teachers and barely being able to stay awake in class, but then you leave high school and the work that you're talking about doing, going out on the road, booking your own shows, probably acting as your own TM, all this type of stuff. That's hard work. And it's funny, like when you're having to work doing someone else's thing, it makes you go to sleep. But if you're hanging your own shingle, it's like, it gives you like a superhuman energy to work.
Yeah. I mean, you know you're miserable a lot of times, but it's a labor of love. You know, it's the same reason we carried a Hammond B3 long before we were on a bus and long before we had any kind of crew. We always had a Hammond B3 with us because we just appreciate the sound of a real Leslie shooting the sound around the room, you know?
Yeah.
We just appreciate real analog gear, so we had to work to get that shit in the house or in the venue.
Indeed. And you were saying you learned a lot from your old man. What do you think your dad's greatest strength as a band leader was, and something that you took away from him?
My father's a tremendous listener as a performer and as a human being. He listens to what people have to say on and off of the stage. And, you know, let's not forget he's a phenomenal guitarist. And he's a great singer, too. He's always been really not so sure of himself as a singer, but, you know, everybody always enjoys hearing him sing. He's just, you know, he's always been one of my favorite performers to watch. And he gave me the confidence to go out and be my own man. You know, he was really proud of me for making that decision and that leap. And he was proud of me, you know, for leaving school because, you know, and I know I'm going off topic a little here, but
good.
It was hard to leave high school, not because of my high school, but because in the afternoon I would go to, all the other kids would go to vocational school and learn how to weld or hairdress or whatever, which are all great professions, but I would go and study jazz theory at the Fine Arts Center in Greenville. And I did that for 2 years, and I could have gone another year, but I really wanted to leave and go on the road. And my father supported that. And between him and my grandfather, I had just a lot of support. And my grandfather was a real stern dude. We lost him when I was 14, but he taught me, he was a sweetheart at the house, but when he was out on the road, he would teach me these little tricks like if they don't want to pay you, just start taking their PA. You don't have to actually take it, but they'll wise up once they see you taking their PA. And I was like, all right. And I tried that, and that ended in a bar brawl when I was like 16, and that's how I got started.
Come on, Grandpa, you got to give me better advice than that. What's it been like for your dad to watch this arc of yours over the last 5 years to a decade? I mean, from those gigs at 13 years old to now Grammy-nominated. I mean, how is he processing all this stuff? Are you still able to rely on him for advice and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think my father always has sage wisdom and sage advice. And, even if it's something that maybe he didn't particularly have to deal with in his career, just his opinion on the matter is still going to be, really useful to me, because I just like the way that he processes things and the way that he breaks things down. So it's just a blessing to me to have my father and the rest of my family so supportive and so, just champions of mine. My dad's still like the head of the fan club. And if you get caught in the elevator with him, man, if you didn't know who I was when you got on that elevator, you will know by the time you get off. He just, that's just how he is. And I'm so thankful to have him.
Have you ever had this happen to you? You casually mention to a friend that you're thinking about getting into gardening, and then the next time you open up your internet browser, you're bombarded with advertisements for Mr. T Chia Pets. That phenomenon can be explained by the internet maxim, if you don't know what the product is, you are the product. Why is Google search free? Why is Facebook free? It's because when you use their services, your browsing history and online data becomes the product for them to sell to other companies to advertise to you. Well, to hell with that. Your online data should be private and yours alone. So what do you need? You need a virtual private network that protects your online data. NordVPN runs in the background while you go about your online business and keeps your data private. It doesn't log any of your activity, and it encrypts your data to provide online anonymity. Listeners to the Working Songwriter Podcast can go to nordvpn.com/TWS, the initials of our show. That is nordvpn.com/TWS, and you can get a special Christmas deal. Every purchase of a 2-year plan will get you an additional 4 months for free. Just use the promo code TWS at checkout. From a very young age, it sounds like Marcus displayed an unusually strong ability to stay focused on his career. That kind of devotion is necessary to be successful in any line of work, of course, but it seems to be especially necessary in entertainment. The arc of a music career isn't a straight line heading up at a perfect angle. It is not parlaying a job in the mailroom of a company into a job on the sales floor and then into the corner office. It's a much more winding and jagged road. Success is never assured in a business where the quality of the product is so subjective. And you never know when the wandering eye of the zeitgeist will land directly on you. So it's all the more important to always be vigilant, to always be working at your top capacity so that you're prepared when the opportunity does meet you. There's a wonderful poem about maintaining that steadfastness by John Keats. It's entitled, "Bright Star, Would I Were Steadfast as Thou Art." Bright star, would I were steadfast as thou art, not in lone splendor hung aloft the night and watching, with eternal lids apart, like nature's patient, sleepless eremite, the moving waters at their priest-like task of pure ablution round earth's human shores, or gazing on the new soft fallen mask of snow upon the mountains and the moors. No, yet still steadfast, still unchangeable, pillowed upon my fair love's ripening breast, to feel forever its soft fall and swell, awake forever in a sweet unrest, still, still to hear her tender taken breath, and so live ever, or else swoon to death. Talk to me then. You have a band with a lot of longtime tenured members. So what is your general philosophy as a band leader? And are there things that you watched your old band do and you say, I love you, Dad, but I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to run my own shop a little bit different?
Well, I think having a tight shop is a tight ship, is really important factor on the road. It's I tried for a long time to keep it as much of a democracy as possible, and at a certain point it just doesn't work when you have that many cooks in the kitchen. I realized that I gained more respect from my band and even the tenured members that you mentioned. I gained more respect by taking the reins and kind of saying, this is what we're going to do, and giving them less to think about, really, and giving them less to worry about. And they just know they have to show up and play this instrument. And I just kind of took the reins as a leader. And in that way, I was a little different from my dad, because my father always wanted to just be a member of a group. And he was a great leader in his own way. But that was something that held him back a lot in his younger days, was hitching his wagon to the wrong mule time and time again, and not ever taking that step in being a leader until later in his years. So that was always his primary advice to me, was to encapsulate what I do and go and do it and be the leader, because if I am the leader, I'm the only one that can let me down.
Yep. Yeah, and it just allows you to follow come up with a path that can be a little bit more forward-looking, rather than 5 or 6 people bickering over, where they'd like to tour next year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then again, to hear me talk, I'm not like James Brown. I don't make my guys wear suits in their bunks and go into the gas station with suits. It's really not that strict of an environment. I don't want to use too, colorful language here, but the main rules on our bus is don't be an asshole, don't dress like an asshole.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Anything else is pretty cool.
You mentioned, though, being able to put them in a position where all they have to do is just show up, hit their mark, and punch a check. And what I would tell to every musician who's in a band doing that is that the guy that's making the decisions, what he's actually dreaming of is being the bass player in a band and just punching a check and not worried about how many tickets, what's pre-sale for tonight? Did we get in the local paper? Yada, yada, yada.
Right. I've always said if I could do it all again, I'd just be a bass player. Maybe.
But for a very successful band. Yeah, for sure. So talk to me a bit about, you got your start there. It sounds like it started regional, then it got more national. And then eventually you end up in Nashville making a pair of records, one with Dave Cobb, one with Dan Auerbach. How did you end up in Nashville making those records? What made you decide to go there and make your records there? And what did you learn from going there, from from going to Music City to work?
Man, we got our first label deal up here with Fantasy Records, and that was like 6 years ago or so. So we always kind of come up here, and William Morris was the first people that ever took any interest in us, and really helped us get on our feet, and it kind of grew from there. So we were always kind of coming up here every now and again, and we'd play at the basement, and we did our showcase at the Basement East. There was about 13 people there, and Brittany Howard was one of those people, which I thought was pretty funny.
Nice.
And it was an interesting night, but I always kind of had a love affair with this town. You know, I love Nashville, and I've described the energy of this city as being, you know, contagious. It's kinetic. When you live on the road, and that your living is putting all of your energy out, you come back to a town that has this just buzzing kinetic energy. It's a good place to plug back in and kind of charge yourself back up. So that's what I've always loved about this town. And the first lengthy period I spent here was when we did the record with Dave Cobb that you mentioned. And, you know, it was like 2 or 3 weeks, but I got a good handle on what it would be like to live here and to drive around and how the commute was, and really just kind of fell in love with it. It's an industry town, but it feels like South Carolina to me. And it's the closest industry town I could get to that still had sweet tea. That was my main rule.
There you go. That's all. And so what was it like working in the studio with Dave Cobb that's done a lot of stuff? Did you find yourself, were there things that you had to catch up with, that you struggled to keep up with? Did it feel natural? Was there a learning curve? What was the experience like?
I think the experience with me and Dave was top notch, man. We couldn't have asked for a better working environment. Me and Dave hit it off like gangbusters, and we're still good buddies. And I love the way that he works. And when you go into a situation like that, to me, I mean, you always need to check your ego at the door. That's a given. But when you're going in to work with a producer of that caliber, you know, you've hired them on for a reason. It's because they have something to say that you brought them in to say. You know what I mean? So questioning their every move is not going to make for a healthy work environment, and it's not going to make for a good record. So I knew that going in, and I think Dave respected that. I think there was a mutual respect in that working process. I think there was a learning curve with the band as far as taking instruction from a producer to that degree. I think there's a learning curve there, but obviously they, you know, put in the work, and they we yielded some great results, man, and the band really, you know, did a number on that record. But working with Dave was one thing, but then working with Auerbach was a completely other thing. It was like polar opposites, both fantastic producers, but just really different approaches. And it's kind of both sides of the coin. Dave likes to get started about 2 p.m. after lunch, and Dan gets started about 9 a.m. But that's because everybody in his band's at least 75. The youngest guy there is about 75, and that's Dave Rowe, bass player. So they already had their breakfast, and they're ready to go at 9, you know?
Yeah, man. They've been up for 5 hours at that point. They're ready to roll.
That's midday. That's a midday session.
Right. Wow, that's yeah, I've heard that his house band is on the elderly side. So what was it like working with those guys? They obviously have a wealth of talent, a wealth of experience that you could draw from. What did you learn from those dudes?
Man, I'd have a better shot saying what I did learn from those guys. I mean, I was just so blown away that that's his band. You know, for one, the studio environment that they've worked in since they were my age or younger has preserved them in a way that they have more energy and just more creative I don't even know how to put it into words, man. Their energy is just contagious, and they seem younger than me to be 80 years old. And he's got two of the Memphis boys in there, Gene Chrisman and Bobby Wood, and they played on like Suspicious Minds. So, I mean, to be on the records that they've been on and to still just be the kind Southern gentlemen that they are, that blew me away. And obviously Dave Rowe was Jerry Reed's son-in-law and bass player. And Billy Sanford played guitar on the record. And his second session in Nashville was Pretty Woman, and he wrote the riff for that song in the session. So the hitters in there were just, you know, astonishing to me, and they were really stoked to be working on my album, which I was really stoked to be working with them. So that energy, to go back to that again, it's just this town, man. Those kind of situations just kind of happen. And you know, it was with that band again. I was lucky enough to play on this session that Prine was doing over there, and I just got to play slide on this song, and I got to be part of that band for, you know, one session, which to me that got me more giddy than them playing on my session, if that makes sense.
Yes.
To be a part of them and to read a chart with those guys, that meant a lot to me, and you know, I wouldn't trade any of that for anything ever.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really you getting to dip your finger in the river of history and realize that you're a drop in it. You know, that's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, man.
And for those guys, I mean, being able to reach their late 70s and 80s and having just made a living doing creative work, I mean, that's winning the game there. You have won the game if you make it into your 80s and all you've done is creative work your entire life. You won.
Mm-hmm. And they still just want to write, and they still just want to create. I hope to be like those guys when I get up there.
What was so then? How did Auerbach run the session with those guys and with you, and how was it different than past processes that you've done?
Man, I've described Dan quite often as like a Captain Ahab. Man, you know, he just kind of sits at the helm, and he trusts his crew, and he trusts his you know, his ship. So he just kind of stands there at the helm, and he played on the whole record too. But you know, he just has such a foresight for everything that's to come. You know, like he just sees ahead to what this one little ripple, what it's going to affect down the road. You know, if we do this now, how will it be heard in generations to come? And that's what I really respect about him as a producer. He can see for miles, is the way I've always put it.
Yeah. I remember he did you ever listen to that Dr. John album he did 6 or 7 years ago?
Lockdown. Yes, sir.
Man, that was the first thing that I heard that he produced, and I'd always been a fan of the Black Keys stuff, but then I was like, wow, this is like a generational talent in the producer's chair here, man. To be able to produce something like that for Dr. John, man.
You're not lying, man. And Dan's tenacity of getting that record done was what blew me away. Just trying to get in touch to him with Mac Revenack, trying to get in touch with him to the point of just driving to New Orleans and tracking him down and just knocking on his door. That is heavy, man. That's heavy.
It is. Do you think, obviously you got a lot of playing and touring ahead of you. Do you think that you'll end up producing and doing session stuff, or do you think your life is mainly going to be on the stage and performing and being in the spotlight there?
Well, you know, man, I just have so many producers that I've worked with and that I admire and that I look up to, and that have kind of shown me the path in a way. You know, I've built a studio here at my home in Tennessee, and I do look forward to producing some acts, and I'm actually stepping into the producer's chair for the first time early next year. So we'll see what happens, or if it's for me at least.
Oh man, it's going to be fun, and it's going to take some of the sting off having to have been off the road for a little while to be able to step into that position.
Right.
Well, right on, man. Well, dude, thanks so much for sitting down and rapping with our show. this week. And yeah, man, when all this COVID madness is over, I look forward to coming out and catching a Marcus King show sometime, brother.
Absolutely, man. Well, thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, take it easy.
All right, take care.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Marcus King's latest album is entitled El Dorado, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.